Let's talk about the F word.
No, not that F word. We're going to talk about feminism. Feminism has come to be associated with a negative connotation, but it actually means the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes.
So unlike the other three girls in this group, I didn't know I was a feminist until this project. They really opened my eyes to it, and I discovered a passion for it, especially on one side of my family where it's very patriarchal and there's strong male figures. I was kind of like, whoa. And then especially on social media where feminism has a negative connotation and there's lots of bashing and crude remarks made. I just didn't have a fully formed opinion on it until this project, which really helped me, and I'm super thankful for them.
I didn't know I was a feminist until I was at Camille Barbin's house sophomore year, and these two gals up here, they helped me realize that I was a feminist because we were sitting on Camille Barbin's bed and Grace was explaining to me what a feminist was, and I had never really been open to being a feminist because I saw how it was negatively portrayed in the media and just how some of my friends thought of being what like a feminist was, and so they helped me open my eyes to it.
So I like to say that I grew up in a matriarchy. I grew up around my mom and my aunts and my grandmothers. There was never a lot of men around, but I really decided that I was a feminist when I was 14, scrolling through Twitter, and I saw the hashtag #YesAllWomen, and I clicked on it, and I scrolled through hundreds of tweets about the injustices that women were facing in their lives, in their own lives, in politics, and just around the world, and it really made me realize that this was a fight that wasn't over.
I came to call myself a feminist because I was raised mostly by women, one of them being my aunt, who everyone knows because she works here. Actually, she always loved her career and her job and was so passionate about it, and she was independent for most of her life. She didn't get married until later in life, and she just always taught me to do well in school and have interests and have hobbies and to really focus on a career and not just rely on having children and having a family, but doing what you want and what makes you happy. So she helped me realize that I was a feminist by helping me pursue my interests and really let them flourish. So I think I can speak for all of us that when we read Pride and Prejudice in Miss Duet's freshman English honors class, it really changed us in the way that we viewed women in literature. The character that stuck out the most to us was Lizzie Bennet, who was the strong female protagonist in the novel. And Lizzie stands out because of her personality and the way that she always wants to further herself. She's not constantly seeking for the approval of men and trying to impress society like most of the other women of the Victorian era during that time. Lizzie was written about differently, and that's why we resonated with her, because she loved to read, and obviously if we were in Miss Duet's class, then we probably love to read. And Lizzie didn't want just the approval of a husband. She wasn't constantly seeking out a man to define her. And along the way, she found a man that really did love her for her unique personality and her gifts academically.
Yeah, and through Miss Duet's freshman year English class, we were finally being introduced to women characters in novels that we could relate to as young females. We're no longer just looking at the stereotypical female, the damsel in distress, the kind that needed a man, that we had been learning about for most of our lives. I mean, we start watching Disney princess movies when we're 2 years old. So we're introduced to Emma and Lizzie and Jane Eyre and all of these women who we realize are more like the women we are. They're similar to us. They're trying to be themselves. They're trying to be independent and trying to find their way in the world, and they're imperfect, and they're so intriguing to read about. So through Miss Duet and her English class freshman year, we really came to see literature in a more feminist light.
So following characters such as Lizzie and Emma, reading Jane Eyre gave us two different perspectives from the degradation of women on Rochester's side of treatment towards Bertha, and then Jane Eyre's own standpoint in her treatment towards Rochester, and then on the receiving end of that. So based on these strong female leads, of course, when FemCrit was an option for the thesis project, we jumped on it.
In the 1970s and 80s, feminists began to realize that they were not being adequately represented in theories such as critical race theory or psychoanalytic theory, and so thus FemCrit was born. FemCrit is the lens used to analyze the widespread oppression of women and their overall role in literature.
There are three distinct tasks of feminist criticism. First, it undermines the status quo by questioning misogyny, its causes, and the constructions of femininity and masculinity.
It defines gender independently from ideas of male supremacy and female inferiority. Basically, it examines what life would be like without the confinements of gender.
Finally, FemCrit analyzes the differences amongst women, bringing to light the inequalities that affect them. We see the success of FemCrit every time we walk into a bookstore, and we see the expanding section of women's stories, the ones they tell and the ones that are told about them. I read Little Women for the first time in 3rd grade, and absolutely no part of my 3rd grade brain was thinking, wow, this is a feminist novel. I really enjoy the feminist critical theory that can be applied to this novel.
I read Little Women in 5th grade, and I just remember really connecting with Jo March in the book because she's a tomboy who loved to write plays and act, which those were all things that I was. I was the weird girl who always wanted to play with the boys and was pretended to write musicals and sing songs and things like that. So I really connected to Jo's creativity and her personality and being unique.
Louisa May Alcott's Little Women chronicles the life of the 4 March sisters and their mother during the Civil War. We watch as they grow up and they branch into 4 very different types of girls.
They grow up in somewhat of a matriarchy because their father's away most of the time at war, and so their mother, Marmee, is the homemaker and the biggest influence in their lives, and ultimately guides them into how to be their own women while also telling them what society thinks of them.
Meg March is the oldest out of the 4 March sisters, and she represents the typical 19th American century woman. She feels pressured by society and to fit into their notions and is envious of the wealth that her friends have, and you can see this whenever she goes to one of their parties.
On the opposite end of the spectrum is Jo March, the 2nd oldest sister. She is seen as a more masculine type sister and dresses and assumes a tomboy-like stature. She dresses like a boy, she likes to hang out with their neighbor Lori, and she likes to write, which wasn't the place of the women at the time. And while her father is away at war, she assumes this need to protect and provide for her family as well, and her quick temper doesn't help the little woman stereotype.
Okay, so now the 3rd sister, Beth, sweet girl Beth. She's the gentle sister and she's very angelic, and her only true love is music, and she dies at a very young age, and her death affects all the sisters, especially Jo.
Ending with Amy, the youngest March sister. She is the spoiled youngest child, vain and always worried about being refined, and seems to want to assume the role of the little woman. As she gets older, she plans to marry for money and wealth and the upper status in society, but then realizes that she's in love with her childhood friend Lori and ends up marrying him.
Something that sticks out in Little Women is the obvious lack of men in the novel. The father, like I said earlier, is away for most of the novel at war, so their mother is the main matriarch in the story and ultimately influences their lives. While their father is away, there is still the patriarchy persisting in society, also in their lives. Like in the way that Jo is often pressured into marrying Lori just because he's a wealthy man. And every sister, part of their narrative in the story is who they're going to marry and why they're going to marry them and why they might not marry certain people. So it goes to show that at the time that was considered the most important part of a woman's life, was finding a husband.
As you can tell, Louisa May Alcott writes a story that covertly addresses women's issues at the time. It's during the 1860s. Women didn't have the right to vote. No one was really pushing for women to break out of these gender roles that have been defined for them. And she's a prime example of a female author who had to compromise some of her characters and some of the visions for her characters because of the pressure of societal norms.
But one of the characters doesn't succumb to the pressures of societal norms, and that's Jo March, our feminist hero. She's also said to be an example of Alcott herself.
Early on in the novel, we realize how different Jo really is. She's not ladylike. She swears, she's clumsy, she's opinionated, she's everything that you're not supposed to be. She also wants to be amidst the chaos of war with her father.
During this time period, early feminists felt the need to assume characteristics that were typically thought of as masculine, like taking up careers or even just wearing pants. This is how women thought they could command respect, because to them, the only people in society that were commanding respect were the men. So they thought by assuming those characteristics, they would eventually be respected by everyone in society.
Jo March assumes what is typically considered masculine characteristics for the time. Masculine characteristics often involve negative emotions that women weren't really allowed to portray in an outward sphere. So whenever Jo has a quick temper with any of her sisters or gets angry and storms out the house, that is an example of what was considered a masculine characteristic, which is part of what set Jo apart from everyone else. These characteristics like compassion and love usually were only shown for women, where Jo was showing the whole spectrum, making her unique and different.
Jo struggles a lot with trying to fit the mold of this little woman. She says, "I'll try and be what he loves to call me, a little woman, and not be rough and wild, but do my duty here instead of wanting to be somewhere else."
Jo also breaks the mold by following the career path that she wants most. She didn't want to stay at home and care for the house and care for her husband, just like many other women in the time did. She wanted to be a teacher, and she wanted to educate young people and show them the new ways of the world. And part of that is all the books and reading that she loved as a child that she could pass on.
In the end, Jo March is able to achieve both success in her personal life with a happy marriage and eventually children, and her career life by breaking free of the gender roles that society wanted her to confine to, and taking up a career that she really did have a passion for and she loved.
Fast forward 100 years, and we were all trying to think of a feminist icon in our modern culture. We are so used to seeing women objectified in movies, TV, and books because of their bodies and not being respected altogether. So we were trying to think of someone who might exemplify this and how they might be able to come past this. And the person that we thought of is Erin Brockovich.
Erin Brockovich is based off of a true story of an unemployed single mother who becomes a legal assistant against all the odds and nearly single-handedly brings down a huge California power company that had been polluting a city's water, which led to harmful health problems in the community.
A lot had changed since when Little Women took place during the Civil War era. Third wave feminism has just taken its course, and it seeks 3 different things: political representation, a right to bodily integrity, and workplace quality.
Unlike Little Women, third wave feminists began to embrace their femininity. They no longer felt that they had to assume these male characteristics like Jo March did in order to command respect. They came to the realization that women were worthy of respect not because they were trying to be men, but because they were human beings too, and they were worthy of respect. So Erin dresses in a way that embraces her sexuality and her womanhood, and she still demands respect from the people that work with her and those who are a part of her life.
Just because Erin demands respect from the men in the film, that doesn't mean she always gets it. In one example, the lawyers in the company that she's working for at the time laugh at her whenever she's presenting information about the case because of the way that she expresses her sexuality. And they forget the fact that she's capable and knows the information really well and understands how to be a lawyer, and just because of the way that she dresses. But she doesn't back down. She maintains her individuality and asserts herself using her bold personality in a male-dominated field. Her experience as a single, unemployed mother don't compromise her passion to be successful in life, and that doesn't define her. That doesn't define how smart she is.
So one parallel between Little Women and Erin Brockovich is the economic need for the women to work. Both the Marches and Erin are pushed into the workforce, and in doing that, they push boundaries laid out for them by their gender.
Later in the film, Erin meets a man named George. While Erin gets wrapped up in her huge case, George becomes the caretaker of her children. This causes him to swap the gender roles of normal society, even now, past Little Women times. So George is at home with the kids, and Erin's working long hours, not really spending as much time with them, but also making a lot more money to support her family.
Eventually, it becomes clear that George isn't comfortable with this mix-up of traditional gender roles. He sees it as a threat to his manliness. He's not the breadwinner. He's doing the cooking and cleaning. It's not what he feels he should be doing. He gives Erin an ultimatum. He says, cut back on the work or we have to break up. But Erin doesn't accept this. She doesn't feel like she has to choose between her career and her children. And since she doesn't accept it, it eventually leads to the disintegration of their relationship as a whole.
Aaron ultimately expounds on the idea of choice feminism, which is an integral part of third wave feminism. It means allowing a woman to freely decide if her life without questioning her femininity or sexuality. Choice feminism doesn't limit a woman's options, but expands them by not requiring her to choose between work and motherhood.
Although she has to sometimes compromise, Erin never has to choose between being a mother and being a dedicated career woman. She can do both. She never has to choose between dressing how she wants and being respected. She does both, which is what choice feminism is about.
Little Women and Erin Brockovich are incredible stories about women, for women, and told by women. Over 130 years apart, these works highlight the social progress and lack thereof that women have made.
The way that women are represented in literature and movies explains how society views them as a whole, especially in the time that they are written and in the context.
Since Little Women, women have been able to break free from some of these restricting gender roles placed upon us by the patriarchy. We can go to work, we can have children, we have the right to vote, and we are represented, though not enough, in government. Like Erin Brockovich, we are able to make our own choices in our lives.
But the work of feminists is far from over. Gender roles still exist, women still face workplace discrimination, women are still constantly objectified in the media and in their own homes. And we see these things in books, movies, and in music, and even in politics. And even as women in our own lives, we often experience these forms of sexism.
But perhaps the greatest role of literature and movies are their ability to inspire. These works give women hope. They make women attuned to social misconceptions and provide proof that women can break social barriers placed in front of them. They see these powerful women doing something that they want to do, and they say to themselves, I want to be like her. I can do whatever I want to.
Think about it. How many women have been inspired by fictional characters? Erin Brockovich, Jo March, Lizzie Bennett, Queen Elsa, Mia Thermopolis, Elle Woods, Leslie Knope, the list goes on and on.
So that's where the true power of literature lies. In the power to point out injustice, and in the power to inspire others to action.
Because we have researched feminist critical theory extensively, we can now apply it to all facets of our life. Whenever we watch TV, read books, or watch movies, we can now see how women are objectified or not objectified, and how women are viewed as a whole in society.
This project really made us realize how important discussion is in our lives. Throughout this journey, we have been able to talk about feminism in a way that we haven't really talked about it before with each other. We sat down for coffee and we did our project, and then it turned into us talking about feminism, our ideas, and our thoughts on a huge range of women's issues. We talked about current events, and we just talked about things that happened in each of our own lives as they related to feminism, and it really helped all of us to broaden our perspective on feminism as a whole.
And as we were studying feminism in our day and age, we came to the realization, as we were studying the transformative power of feminism, that we're in the fourth wave feminism, which is a come-as-you-are feminism that works for social justice.
I don't think any of us will ever look at literature, movies, TV, and music without stopping to think about how women are portrayed for better or for worse. This knowledge of FemCrit theory will be with us for the rest of our academic careers and most likely the rest of our lives. I mean, we already catch ourselves analyzing everything.
Not only does feminist critical theory apply to our academic lives, but it also applies to our other lives and what's going on around us. Whenever we're watching TV and listening to politics and seeing what's going on in the world, we can ask ourselves, how are women being objectified? How are they being viewed? What are we being granted and what's being taken away? What's changed and what will change in the future, and what can we do to be an impetus for that change?